Did you know that tipping in America isn't just a polite gesture, it's practically an obligation? If you've ever eaten at a restaurant in the US, you know that leaving less than 15% feels almost like an insult. But here's the big question: why do Americans tip so much? And how did it become such a powerful social rule? To understand this, we need to go back in time, centuries back to Europe, and then follow the story across the Atlantic to America. The European beginnings. Tipping didn't actually start in America. Its roots are found in 17th century England among the wealthy aristocracy. The practice was originally a way for the rich to flaunt their wealth and status. Aristocrats would hand coins to servants, porters, and carriage drivers, not necessarily out of generosity, but to reinforce class distinctions. If you could afford to tip, you were clearly well off. The term tip itself is thought to have come from old tavern culture in England. One story suggests that taverns placed small boxes labeled to ensure promptitude, which, abbreviated to TIP, patrons would drop coins inside to get quicker service. Whether that story is legend or fact, it shows how tipping was linked to privilege and social standing. But by the 19th century, Europe began to change. Industrialization, labor rights, and new social attitudes made tipping feel outdated. Many Europeans started to see it as degrading, even humiliating. Countries like France and Italy eventually moved toward service charges automatically included in the bill, while in England, tipping remained but became less central. Tipping lands in America. Here's where the story takes a surprising turn. In the mid to late 1800s, tipping was imported to the United States. Wealthy Americans who traveled to Europe came back wanting to imitate aristocratic customs. They saw tipping as cultured and sophisticated, but when tipping arrived in the US, it didn't remain a status symbol. Instead, it morphed into something much more tied to economics and exploitation. After the Civil War ended in 1865, many newly freed African Americans found work in industries like railroads, hotels, and restaurants. Employers didn't want to pay fair wages, so they encouraged tipping instead. For example, in the railroad industry, formerly enslaved men often worked as Pullman porters, serving passengers, carrying luggage, shining shoes. The company paid them little or nothing, claiming they would earn enough from tips. The same was true in restaurants and hotels. Workers were often excluded from wages and forced to rely on customer generosity. This was the critical turning point. In America, tipping wasn't just about showing status. It became a substitute for wages. Employers saw it as a way to shift the responsibility of paying workers onto customers. Backlash and controversy. Not everyone accepted tipping. In the early 1900s, tipping sparked heated debate in the U.S. Many people considered it un-American. Critics argued that it created inequality, undermined democracy, and encouraged servitude. Newspapers at the time described tipping as a cancer in the breast of democracy. In fact, several states, including Iowa, South Carolina, and Tennessee, actually passed laws banning tipping. The bans didn't last long, but they show just how controversial the practice once was. So why didn't America abandon tipping like Europe did? The answer is tied to economics. Employers quickly realized how profitable the system was for them. If workers could live off tips, business owners didn't need to pay fair wages. By the time the bans faded away, tipping had already taken deep root in American culture. The tipped minimum wage. Fast forward to the 20th century. By the 1960s, tipping was fully entrenched in restaurants and hospitality. Then came a defining moment. In 1966, the U.S. government introduced a separate tipped minimum wage. Here's how it worked. Employers could legally pay tipped workers less than the federal minimum wage, as long as their tips made up the difference. At first, this might have seemed reasonable, but over time, it created a massive gap. Today, the federal tipped minimum wage is just $2.13 an hour, a number that hasn't changed since 1991. Think about that. A worker earning $2.13 an hour must rely almost entirely on customer tips to survive. If customers don't tip, workers don't make enough money. And while some states, like California and Oregon, require employers to pay full minimum wage regardless of tips, many others still stick with the federal standard. This law cemented tipping as a cornerstone of the American service industry. Unlike in Europe, where service charges replaced tips, in the U.S., tipping became the system itself. How tipping spread beyond restaurants. It didn't stop at restaurants. Over time, tipping spread to bars, taxis, hair salons, delivery services, hotels, coffee shops, and now even app-based services like Uber and DoorDash. By the late 20th century, tipping had become not just normal, it was expected. This expectation is so strong that it feels almost mandatory. In fact, surveys show that over 80% of Americans feel guilty if they don't leave a tip at a restaurant, even when service is poor. The original idea of tipping as a reward has disappeared. Today, it's a requirement. So, why do Americans tip so much? The answer begins with history. Tipping crossed the Atlantic as a European tradition, but in America, it collided with a unique set of circumstances: post-slavery labor exploitation, employer cost-cutting, and eventually government laws that cemented tipping into the economy. Instead of fading away, tipping became a survival tool for millions of workers and a social expectation for millions of customers. By the mid-20th century, tipping wasn't just part of American culture, it was a cornerstone of the economy. A social expectation, not a choice. Let's start with the most obvious point. In America, tipping isn't really optional. Sure, technically you can walk out of a restaurant without leaving a tip, but socially, that's almost unthinkable. Studies show that over 90% of U.S. restaurant diners tip, with the average rate now hovering between 18 to 22%. If you leave less, it feels like breaking an unwritten rule. Servers may interpret it as an insult. Your friends may judge you, and even you may feel guilty. This isn't generosity, it's social pressure. Tipping has become a ritual of American dining, much like saying please and thank you. The psychology of guilt and reward. Why is this pressure so powerful? Psychology gives us some clues. Humans are wired to avoid embarrassment and seek approval. In a restaurant, the server isn't just bringing food, they're building a relationship, however temporary. When the bill arrives, leaving a tip feels like closing that relationship on good terms. A bad tip feels like rejection. Research shows that most Americans tip even when the service is bad. Why? Because not tipping feels uncomfortable, awkward, and even shameful. It's less about rewarding service and more about avoiding guilt. And yet, there's also the flip side: reward. A big tip makes us feel generous, kind, even powerful. Leaving a 25% tip can create a sense of pride. I'm a good customer. I value hard work. In this way, tipping becomes less about the server and more about how the customer wants to see themselves. The American value of hard work. But there's something even deeper at play: American culture. America is often described as the land of opportunity, where success comes from hard work. Tipping fits perfectly into this narrative. The idea is simple. If a server works hard and provides good service, they'll earn more money. It's a direct reward system that seems to embody the American dream. Of course, the reality is more complicated. Not all workers are rewarded equally, and factors like appearance, gender, and race can influence tips. Still, the cultural belief remains strong. Good service deserves a good tip. This belief is so ingrained that many Americans don't see tipping as unfair. They see it as part of capitalism itself. Just like in business, you earn based on performance. Expansion of tipping culture. Once a cultural habit takes root, it tends to spread, and tipping in America has spread far beyond restaurants. Bars. It's standard to tip $1 to $2 per drink. Taxis and ride shares, 10 to 20% is expected. Hair salons and barbers, 15 to 20%. Coffee shops and cafes. A tip jar, or now, a digital screen asking for 15 to 25%. Delivery services. From pizza to Amazon packages, tipping has become part of the norm. And with the rise of technology, tipping has entered the digital age. Apps like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart automatically prompt users to add a tip, often with suggested amounts of 20%, 25%, or even 30%. Many people feel pressured to click one, even if they originally planned to leave less. This phenomenon has been dubbed tipflation. Americans are tipping in more places at higher percentages than ever before. The role of social signaling. Tipping also works as a form of social signaling. In other words, tipping isn't just about the money, it's about what the money says about you. A generous tip signals kindness, wealth, or status. A stingy tip signals selfishness, disrespect, or poverty. In fact, researchers have found that people sometimes leave larger tips when they're with friends or on dates because they want to appear generous. In this sense, tipping becomes performative. It's not only about paying the server, it's also about telling a story about yourself. The inequality of tipping. Of course, not all tips are equal, and that's where the controversy comes in. Studies show that tipping often reflects biases rather than service quality. For example, white servers, on average, receive higher tips than black servers. Women, especially younger women, often receive larger tips than men. Attractive workers tend to earn more, regardless of their actual performance. This raises tough questions. If tipping is supposed to reward good service, why do these inequalities exist? The truth is, tipping isn't purely merit-based. It's influenced by unconscious bias, stereotypes, and even personal mood. This means that while some workers earn hundreds of dollars in tips on a busy night, others struggle to make ends meet, simply because of factors beyond their control. The tension between fairness and tradition. So why doesn't America just abandon tipping altogether? After all, many countries have. In Japan, tipping is considered rude. In much of Europe, service charges are already included in the bill. Why does America hold on so tightly? Part of the answer is tradition. Tipping has been around in America for over 150 years. Once a practice becomes deeply embedded in culture, it's very hard to change. Another reason is fear of higher prices. Many Americans believe that if tipping disappeared, menu prices would skyrocket to cover higher wages. Even though this may not be entirely true, the perception keeps tipping alive. Finally, there's the emotional element. For many Americans, tipping feels personal. It's a way to connect, to express gratitude, and to participate in a ritual that feels distinctly American. So why do Americans tip so much? It's not just about economics anymore. It's about culture, psychology, and identity. Tipping is driven by social pressure, guilt, pride, and the belief in rewarding hard work. It's expanded into nearly every corner of American life, reinforced by digital apps and social expectations. But tipping is also controversial. It creates inequality, reflects biases, and sometimes rewards appearance more than service. And yet, despite these issues, the tradition remains powerful, perhaps too powerful to break. So far, we've seen how tipping in America began as a wage substitute and how culture and psychology have kept it alive. But here's the big question. What comes next? Will tipping continue to dominate American life, or are we standing on the edge of change? The rise of tipflation. If you've been to the U.S. recently, you've probably noticed something. You're being asked to tip in more places than ever before. At coffee shops, food trucks, airport kiosks, even at self-service counters, you're prompted to leave a tip often on a digital screen that flashes suggested percentages of 20%, 25%, or even 30%. This phenomenon has been nicknamed tipflation. It's not just restaurants anymore. Delivery apps, ride-hailing apps, grocery pickup services, and even home repair apps now prompt for tips. In some cases, the prompt appears before the service is even completed, putting customers in an awkward position. The result? Many Americans are experiencing tip fatigue. Surveys show growing frustration. People feel pressured, manipulated, or simply exhausted by the constant demand for tips. Some customers are beginning to push back, asking, "Why am I tipping for something that used to be included in the price?" This frustration could mark the beginning of a cultural shift. Experiments with no-tipping models. But what if tipping didn't exist at all? A handful of restaurants in America have actually tried this experiment. Instead of tipping, these restaurants raise menu prices slightly and pay staff a fair, consistent wage. The idea is to eliminate the uncertainty of tipping, reduce inequality, and give customers a more honest price up front. For example, in 2015, famous New York restaurateur Danny Meyer announced that his restaurants would move to a no-tipping model. At first, it gained a lot of attention. Prices went up by 20 to 25%, and staff received stable pay. But here's the problem. Many customers didn't like it. Higher menu prices scared them away, even though the overall cost was the same. Servers, too, were divided. Some appreciated the stability, but many missed the chance to make big money on busy nights. Within a few years, most of Meyer's restaurants quietly returned to tipping. This shows just how deeply ingrained tipping is in the American psyche. Even when alternatives are offered, both customers and workers often prefer the familiar system, policy, and the law. Another factor shaping the future of tipping is government policy. Remember the tipped minimum wage? At the federal level, it's still just 2.13 an hour, unchanged since 1991. But some states have started to challenge this. California, Oregon, Washington, and a few others require employers to pay full minimum wage to all workers, regardless of tips. In these states, tipping is still common, but it's more like a bonus than a necessity. Other states are debating similar laws. Activists argue that abolishing the tipped wage would reduce inequality and stabilize incomes. Critics, however, claim it would drive up menu prices and hurt small businesses. The battle isn't over, but one thing is clear: the law will play a major role in shaping the future of tipping. The role of generational change. Another big question: what will younger generations do? Surveys show that Gen Z and millennials are less enthusiastic about tipping than older generations. They're more likely to complain about tip prompts, and they tend to prefer transparency like having service charges built into the price. This doesn't mean tipping will vanish overnight, but cultural shifts often begin with younger generations. Over time, as new attitudes spread, tipping culture could evolve or even shrink. Still, there's a paradox. While younger people dislike tipping, they also use digital apps more frequently, and those apps aggressively push tipping. So the future may depend on how much resistance these generations are willing to show. The two possible futures. So where is America headed? There are two main possibilities. 1. Tipping becomes even more widespread. Tipflation continues, and Americans get used to tipping everywhere, from restaurants to retail counters. Suggested tip percentages keep rising, and 25 to 30% becomes the new normal. Digital technology makes tipping more automatic, almost like a built-in tax. 2. A pushback against tipping. Frustrated by tip fatigue, Americans demand change. More states eliminate the tipped minimum wage, forcing employers to pay higher wages. Restaurants experiment with service charges or no-tipping models, and eventually customers adapt. Which future will win? It's hard to say, but what's certain is that tipping will remain a heated debate in American life. What tipping really says about America. At the end of the day, tipping in America isn't just about money. It tells us something deeper about the culture itself. It reflects the individualism of American society, the idea that customers personally decide how much a worker deserves. It reflects the capitalist mindset: you earn based on performance, not equality. And it reflects the contradictions of American life: generosity on one hand, inequality on the other. For many, tipping is a way to express gratitude. For others, it's a symbol of an unfair system. Either way, it's uniquely American. Conclusion and call to action. So, why do Americans tip so much? Because history made it an economic necessity, because culture made it a social expectation, because psychology makes it hard to stop, and because change, even when attempted, often fails against tradition. But the future is not written yet. Will America embrace no-tipping models or continue down the path of tipflation? Will younger generations demand reform, or will the ritual of tipping remain unshakable? One thing is certain: the next time you leave a tip, whether it's a few dollars at a restaurant or 25% on a delivery app, you're not just paying for service. You're participating in a centuries-old tradition that reflects the very heart of American society. And now we'd love to hear from you. Do you think tipping should continue, or should America finally move to a fair wage system? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Did You Know, where we uncover the hidden stories behind everyday life.